All right, so today we're going to talk about hydration and maintaining your optimal hydration. And to do that, we need to first start with talking about your total body water. So we can abbreviate that as just TBW, total body water. And you have around 50 to 65% of your body mass. 50 to 65% of your body mass is water. And it's going to change depending on gender, for example. Like females typically are going to be on the lower end of this. Their body composition, and if you think about muscle, as we talked about, muscle is like 70% water. So this is why like a really lean person would be closer to 65, maybe even higher than that. So this is where you're at. And so if we look at, say, a 70 kilogram individual, they're going to have, let's say, around 42 liters of water in their body. Okay, so pretty impressive. Now we can break the total body water into different compartments. So we can look at, we will call your intracellular fluid. Intracellular fluid. This is literally the fluid that is inside of your cells, and this is around 2/3 of your body weight. So around 2/3 of your total body water is the intracellular fluid. And this is going to be rich in important electrolytes and ions. So for example, it's going to be higher in your potassium, your magnesium. Some of we talked about this earlier with the cell membrane potential. A lot of these ions are going to be inside of there, and phosphate and so on. Now, we have the extracellular fluid, right? So that's the fluid outside of the cells. And so we can go like this. And we'll have our extracellular fluid. And if this is 2/3, this will be about 1/3, okay? About 1/3 of the total body water. Now, the extracellular fluid can also be put into different compartments as well. But it's important to note that this has other electrolytes that's rich in or things. We want to mention, in this case, sodium is a big one. Okay, so sodium, as we remember, is around 145 millimolar or milliequivalents, which is, if you do the math, around 3.3 grams per liter of sodium is how much is in the extracellular fluid, right? Now, we can now put this in different compartments as well. So we'll put this into we can put this into our interstitial fluid. And this interstitial fluid is going to be, we can say around 10, 11 liters of water, right? Again, using this example up here. Now, we also have our blood. And our blood has two parts to it, right? We have our formed elements, and we have our plasma. So the blood, right, is around 5 liters or so, and the plasma is going to make up around 3 liters of that, this being 2 liters here. This is just like all your cells and everything, okay? So your plasma is 3 liters. And then your blood, right? 5 liters. So this is how you can basically change all of or how we can organize all the water that's in your body, right? Now, when it comes to your water movement, this is all maintained by osmosis, okay? It's the osmolarity. And if we remember osmolarity, in fact, we can just draw like a little example here. I did this before. So let's say we have this container right here, and we fill it full of water, right? This is water. Let's say this is all water in here, okay? And it's this level. And what we want to do, let's say that we put in a semi-permeable membrane right here, okay? Water is going to be equal to both sides. Now, let's say that we took and we added, this is a salt shaker, right? We added some salt into here. If we did that, what would happen? Well, now we're going to draw the same thing. Oh, that's not even. Not that my artistic renditions are perfect anyways. But what's this going to look like? You put a whole bunch of salt onto this side. In this case, then, you will have this water level will be higher and this water will be lower. Why is that? Because you have all this salt over here. And so it's going to try to regulate the osmolarity. So over here, the osmolarity are equal to each other, right? Over here, the osmolarity was not equal to each other. And so you have, of course, you have the pressure of the hydrostatic pressure that's pushing down on this. But you also have all the water here in this compartment wanted to come over here in order to reach an equilibrium, right? That's the osmotic gradient. And as we talked about with our filtration and how our kidneys worked, this is the driving force behind how filtration works in general, right? So this is really important in order to understand these osmotic gradients and how all the fluid is maintained by maintaining these gradients, okay? So as I said, we have these different ions on the inside and different ions on the outside, and this is going to create different gradients because we have those ion pumps that are going to create different concentrations of the ions, and then that can help create gradients, right? Now, water, though, wants to follow an osmotic gradient, and so in the cells, you're typically going to have an osmolarity, okay? So your osmolarity in your cells, your body, is typically going to be around 285 to 295 milliosmoles per, well, we say per kilogram, osmolarity. So this is typically what it is. And our cells need to maintain this. It's all maintained by these ion gradients, all right? And this is critical in order to maintain the hydration status. So a core principle to all of this is that hydration is really maintained by osmolarity, and osmolarity is maintained by these ions or electrolytes. These are the ion concentration, electrolyte concentration to maintain the osmolarity. Now, with osmolarity, this is primarily regulated due to the sodium ions. Okay, the sodium ions is really what's going to help ensure that the effective circulating volume is exactly what it needs to be. So it's not just how much water that you're consuming, but it's the sodium levels that's going to be regulated, as we talked about in our module on the kidneys and the nephron. All right. So when you have just small changes of osmolarity, let's say you have a change of 1 to 2%, this change right there is going to do two things. It's going to cause you to be thirsty. It's going to alter your hormones. All right. So it has two things. So one is our thirst sensation. This will be activated, and it'll be our hormones. Certain hormones we'll talk about are going to be changed. Now, the reason for our thirst is, again, we have like these osmoreceptors is what they're called, like in the hypothalamus and different areas. And when our osmolarity increases, then there's certain ion channels that are affected by that, and that causes depolarization, and then you just get this thirst sensation. Oh, I need to get some water. And similar thing happens with the hormones. So this is why osmolarity regulates our thirst sensation and our whole hydration status, okay? And like I said, just small changes, 1 or 2%. We're going to come back to this because it's going to be important for our exercise performance that we're talking about. So I also mentioned hormones. What hormones are we talking about? Well, specifically, our first hormone we want to talk about, let's see if I just kind of go like this here. Our first hormone is this ADH, all right, or antidiuretic hormone, or vasopressin. Well, what does this guy do? So, let's just do some quick physiology review. We have our nephron. This is going to be the proximal convoluted tubule right here. let's see, go like this, come over here. All right. Of course, a little bit different, but now here, I just want to draw this cell, draw like a larger cell. This is the cell, this is a cell membrane right here, okay? Now, this right here is going to be our urine, all right? So our urine, okay? And this ADH is going to affect these cells, or this principal cell. And what happens is you have these little vesicles inside, and on these vesicles, they contain a very important protein. These proteins are called aquaporins. So there's specifically AQP2, aquaporin 2, and that's what these guys are right there. And what happens is they get inserted into this membrane right here. This is the apical membrane. And you have water that's inside of here. And this water is unable to penetrate because it's a phospholipid bilayer, so it's not able to penetrate. But if these aquaporin 2 channels get inserted right here, then the water can come into the cell. All right? Now you also have these other channels over here. These ones are your aquaporin. These are your aquaporins like 2 and 3 channels. And so once water comes in, water can easily leave out through the basolateral side, okay? Basolateral side. Okay, this is basically where all your blood is and your vasa recta and everything. So aquaporin, so ADH, all right, ADH is going to come in. So here's ADH, and it'll come in and it'll stimulate by binding to its receptor, and it's a G protein coupled receptor, and activates PK, CAMP, and causes these vesicles to be put into the membrane, and then water can be reabsorbed. So if there's no aquaporins here, the water will just come through and make urine, right? But if you put aquaporins in, then the water is going to want to come out here. Why? Because out here, all right, the osmolarity out here is going to be higher. And so the water is going to want to go from a low concentration to a high concentration. So the water is going to want to come out here and then into here. And this is the importance of the ADH. So if we want to reabsorb water, this is exactly what happens. ADH comes in, puts these vesicles here, water can now leave the collecting duct and be reabsorbed following its concentration, following the osmolarity gradient, and be reabsorbed into the blood. All right? So that's the purpose of ADH. Now, another hormone that's very important. Well, first I'll add, okay, so ADH, what does it do? We'll just add some notes here. All right, so it increases H2O reabsorption, and we're also, by putting in the aquaporin 2 channels, a trigger to get, why does ADH get triggered in the first place? Well, it's because we have an increased osmolarity, right? Our increase in osmolarity is going to say, hey, we need to get, the hypothalamus is going to release ADH, and then ADH will come and do its job. Now, like I said, ADH responds to this osmolarity. Well, the other hormone that responds to changes in like a low blood volume and to maintain our osmolarity, specifically via sodium, is aldosterone. That's the other big hormone that you need to remember here. So aldosterone. And what does aldosterone do? Again, just a quick review. So aldosterone going to act maybe over here. All right, so it has cells over here on the proximal convoluted tubule, and as well as over here on these principal cells. And when it does this, it's going to take sodium that's inside of here, and it's going to be excreted, and it's going to allow sodium to come out. All right, it's going to basically this is through the principle of the work of aldosterone. Aldosterone is going to allow sodium to do this. Then because it's going to make more sodium potassium ATPase pumps and increase the epithelial sodium channels and get sodium to come out. Now, think about how these hormones work together. As sodium comes out, what is that going to do to the osmolarity? If sodium's coming out of here, what will happen to the osmolarity? The osmolarity will increase. If the osmolarity increases, what's that going to want to do for the water? The water is going to want to come out of the collecting duct and be reabsorbed. But it can't do that unless there are aquaporins right here, aquaporin 2 channels. But aquaporin 2 channels are only going to come out if you have ADH acting on this receptor to cause aquaporin 2 channels to be here. So the aldosterone and ADH work hand in hand together. Aldosterone brings sodium out so you can get that an osmolarity you need so you can maintain your blood volume, and ADH allows the water to come through. So you can think about it where ADH is primarily looking at your water regulation, okay, through your osmolarity, all right, because it's going to dilute or do whatever, it's going to move to whatever way, water will move whatever way it needs to in order to maintain that osmolarity. So ADH is in control of water, and then aldosterone is going to be looking at your volume, your circulating volume, primarily through looking at your sodium levels. And of course, aldosterone is important in the RAS system that we talked about, the renin-angiotensin aldosterone system, because at the end, so if you have at the nephron, the macula densa senses there's low sodium levels, or the circulating blood volume is low, that's going to cause the secretion of renin, and then you get angiotensin 2 it gets produced eventually to stimulate the adrenal glands to produce aldosterone, and then aldosterone does this job here to reabsorb the sodium levels, right? So this is the important mechanism between keeping with these two hormones, aldosterone and ADH. These are going to be important when it comes to our exercise and again, maintaining hydration, which is what we're talking about right now. And it's really actually impressive when you consider how tightly regulated this is, because again, osmolarity at 285, 295 milliosmoles, it keeps it very tight. And it does so just by with these hormones. So it doesn't matter, as long as you're drinking enough water, the range is really impressive because we can control everything by how much we're going to urinate out. In fact, the kidneys, they can, if you're not drinking, like you're super dehydrated, and so you want to have as much ADH as possible so you can reabsorb as much water as possible, it's possible that your kidneys only produce around 0.3 liters of urine per day. So it's going to be super concentrated at that, right? 0.3 liters. And so it has to, so you have to make some urine because your kidneys are still doing the filtration. As you're doing the filtration, you obviously have an obligatory amount of urine you have to produce. And so it can go down to like only, half a liter, 0.3 liters per day. Now, in contrast, if you are drinking a lot of water and way more than you need, if you drink too much water, what's going to happen to your osmolarity? Well, the osmolarity is going to decrease, and that's going to be really problematic. You're going to dilute sodium levels and cause hyponatremia, which is lethal. And so your body responds very quickly, your kidneys do, and quickly you insert aquaporins into the apical membrane here, so you can urinate a lot out. And you can urinate like about a liter per hour. So we typically say it's up to like 20 liters per day. Okay, so between 0.3 to 20 liters per day. So the concentration then, in terms of osmolarity, it is a pretty wide range. Again, the blood and the plasma, everything around 285, 295 milliosmoles. But as we talked about with the nephrons, because you can reabsorb pretty much all of the sodium, and you can reabsorb so much of the water, then your osmolarity has a pretty large range as well. And so you're talking around about 50 milliosmoles per kilogram to around 1,200, all right, milliosmoles. So 50 to 1,200 milliosmoles, that's super, super concentrated urine, or only 50. So it's very impressive that our kidneys are, able to do that in the first place. So when it comes to hydration, it's the kidneys that regulate our hydration, and it does so by mostly looking at osmolarity. And then secondly, by looking at the blood volume, so the total volume, right? So with that, we can look at, okay, well, how much water do we need? Like, how much water should we be drinking? Well, it really depends on how much water are you losing. Because ideally, we want your water intake should equal our water loss. Okay, that's going to be the optimal scenario, basically. You don't need more. It's just like with food, right? Calories in, calories out. If you want to maintain your weight or whatever, it's calories in, calories out. Well, with water, you can pretty much, as long as you're taking in as much water as you're losing, then you're good to go. And you can see how tightly regulated the kidneys are. You can have such a wide range of water intake that you're going to be okay. So there's just an adequate amount of water that you want to make sure you're taking, which is simply making sure you are ingesting enough water or beverages in total in order to account for this loss. So how much water would that be? Well, we can just kind of go through, well, how much water loss are we talking about? And when we do this, we typically look at two types of water losses. You have your insensible losses, okay? So if we look at our insensible losses, now this is going to range, 0.8 to 1.2 liters per day. So we'll just put around 1 liter per day. And what does insensible mean? So it means you can't, you don't really notice it, right? So things like your respiration. Okay. Respiration. And because, especially if the air is dry, every time you exhale, you're going to lose some water vapor. So if the air is dry, there's no humidity, then you're going to lose even more. If you're exercising, you're breathing a lot more, just having a higher ventilation, that you're going to lose more. Now, on average, you do, one of the things to think about is interesting, I'll just add, is we remember in our bioenergetics, we were talking about the mitochondria, and the mitochondria makes water. You make about as much water as you lose through the respiration. And so they kind of become a wash, right? So several hundred milliliters, per day or so. But of course, it could be more with, like I said, a higher elevation, altitude, so you're breathing more, right? So higher ventilation and so on. Another big one is your skin. And this has, like with sweating, for example. And this is not your, this is just like past the sweating. It's not, it's just, you have your skin is moist, and so you're just losing water. So it's not a lot. It just happens throughout the day, right? So this totally equals like 1 liter. And then you have your sensible losses. And these ones are the ones that the ones that we actually notice, right? So one we'll just get out of the way first is our feces. Okay, so this is going to be anywhere between 100 to 300 milliliters per day. Of course, it's going to depend if you're having like GI issues, right? That's going to be it could be a lot higher. Another one is urine. Okay, and how much for urine did we say? Well, we already talked about it. 0.3 to 20 liters, or it could even be more. We'll just say that though. 0.3 liters to 20 liters per day. All right, those are sensible. What's another sensible one? Sweating. That's the real one. This is really when it comes to our exercise. Okay. Okay. So when it comes to exercise, this one really depends on what's going on, right? So at rest, it might be quite low. So at rest, we're talking about maybe only 100 milliliters per day, and it's pretty low. But during exercise, that's when it can increase a lot. You're talking about 1 to maybe even up to 3 liters or more per day, or per hour, per hour. So of course, it could be even more per day. So it really can add a lot. And then the other important thing, if you're sweating this much, 1 to 3 liters per hour, then you have to look at the sweat composition, because your sweat contains sodium, right? And this is going to be a big deal because you have sodium in your extracellular space that's maintaining that entire osmotic gradient. And so typically, your sodium levels in your sweat it really depends on if you're acclimated or if you're not acclimated. So typically we look at somebody who is acclimated, so they're used to like sweating and exercising and everything. They're going to lose. So if we say, let's see, an acclimated person, around 20 millimolar per liter is what they're losing. And we can just do some quick basic estimates. So that's around 0.5 grams per liter in the acclimated person. But contrast that to the unacclimated person. Now you're talking anywhere from 40 to 80 millimolar per liter. So millimoles per liter. So that's pretty high. I mean, that's around 1 to 2.5 grams of sodium per liter. So even up to 3 grams per liter. But typically it's if you're like a super salty sweater, maybe it'll be up that high. But 1 to 2 grams per liter. So people who are unacclimated, they're going to lose a lot more sodium than somebody who is not. And if you think about what's going to happen here, remember our blood osmolarity is around 3.3 grams per liter. And our sweat is between 0.5 to 2 grams per liter. So that means when we sweat, it's hypotonic, right? Our sweat has less sodium in it than our blood does. Now think about what happens with the osmolarity, okay? If your blood is 3.3 grams per liter and your sweat is 0.5 to 1 or 2 grams per liter, then what's going to happen to the concentration of sodium in the blood? It's going to go up. If sodium concentration in the blood goes up, then what's going to happen to the osmolarity? Well, then osmolarity is going to go up. If osmolarity is going to go up, then what's that going to signal to the hypothalamus? That you are thirsty. And it's going to secrete, release ADH, right? And then ADH is going to come in and it's going to cause the aquaporin 2s to be inserted in the apical membrane here and get water reabsorption. It's also going to tell aldosterone, because it's going to activate the RAS system, and tell aldosterone through angiotensin 2 to tell the adrenal glands to tell aldosterone to let us to reabsorb more of the sodium in the proximal convoluted tubule. So all because of that sweating aspect. So sweating it's hypotonic, and that's an important area. So we're actually able to conserve quite a bit of sodium, and actually as our aldosterone levels increase, we can start to reabsorb more sodium and lose less sodium in our sweat as well. So when it comes to sweating in general, we see 2 things. One, our osmolarity goes up, and our blood volume goes down, right? So sweating here is going to lead to 2 things, right? An increased osmolarity and a decrease in your blood volume. And those two things together are going to activate the RAS system so that we can reabsorb more sodium to maintain our blood volume and reabsorb more water to maintain the optimal osmolarity. So this gets us a better picture of how to maintain that hydration status that we all want and need. Because again, when you go less than 1 to 2% hydration, I thought I wrote that down. No. If you have less than 1 to 2% dehydration, then you start to have impairments, cognition, your physical performance, and so on. And that's why with our osmolarity, if you have, like I say here, less than 1 to 2% dehydration or change in this, which equates to the dehydration, then you're going to activate all these systems. Otherwise, you have an impairment. So how do we maintain that hydration? It all comes down to maintaining your sodium and your electrolyte requirements and your water intake, okay? So first, we've already talked about how we want our water intake to equal our water loss or be maybe more. But in order to, since hydration is regulated by our osmolarity, which therefore is regulated by our electrolytes, and specifically sodium, because that's the extracellular, that's this ion extracellular space, the primary one, we need to make sure that we are at the minimum requirements for sodium. So what does that look like? So when it comes to, I was going to write sodium, I will write sodium, but I normally write it this way, right? Sodium. Okay, how much do we really need? So we can say the AI, artificial intelligence. Now, the adequate intake of sodium is we're probably around 1.5 grams per day. That's it. And in fact, it's often recommended to be around keep it under 2.3 grams per day to avoid hypertension. But you only need 1.5 grams per day. And think about the reasons why. Again, sodium's in the blood. If you have high aldosterone levels, you can reabsorb all the sodium. So there could be like no sodium in your urine. You can reabsorb all of it. So the only time you're losing sodium is when you're sweating. But if you're not exercising, you're hardly losing any sodium at all. So you hardly need to have any sodium. And so, but by taking 1.5 grams of sodium per day, well, you more than have sufficient sodium to do everything as long as you have a normal functioning system. So you don't need very much sodium. It's pretty amazing that our body can conserve sodium so well and bump up aldosterone, so even the sweat has less sodium in it, right? Now, the thing is, though, if you start sweating, if you're only taking that much sodium and you start sweating more and you start losing more than a gram or whatever per day, you're going to start having problems. But how much sodium do people normally get anyways? Well, the average intake, I guess I can't write AI anymore. The normal intake, can I do that? Normal intake. The normal intake is like 3 to 6 grams per day. Okay, that's way more than what we need. And so our body is constantly having to do what? Lowering aldosterone levels so we can get rid of that sodium. Because here's the thing, if that sodium levels, if it goes high, what's going to happen to our osmolarity? What will happen to our osmolarity if sodium levels are high? Then our osmolarity is going to increase. If our osmolarity increases, what's going to happen to our thirst sensation? We're going to be really thirsty. And what's that going to do? It's going to make us drink more water. It's going to release ADH. It's going to make us reabsorb more water. If we reabsorb more water, then our blood volume is going to increase. If our blood volume increases, then we can start to run the risk of hypertension. Now, not everybody ever gets hypertension when they have extra salt and drink lots of water. Why? Because their kidneys work really well. They're able to quickly secrete more of the sodium so it doesn't build up in their body, and they maintain our ADH and aldosterone levels really well, so they're not what we call salt sensitive. So my point that I really want to understand here is, yeah, you only need like 1.5 grams of sodium per day, even if you start doing a little bit of exercise, because as soon as you start doing some exercise and you start losing, a half a gram or a full gram of exercise, then your kidneys will just start reabsorbing all that sodium. But once you start exercising more and you really start sweating out, a few liters, where you are losing obviously more than a couple of grams of sodium, you're going to need to increase your sodium intake. But that's not going to be a problem. It's not going to cause hypertension, even if you are salt sensitive, because you're just providing the adequate intake. And that's the point to maintaining optimal hydration, is just to ensure that you are ingesting enough sodium so that you can have the optimal hydration. All right. And I will just add, this is kind of a different topic, but if you do need to increase your sodium intake to, several grams, like 3-6 grams or whatever, it's important that you also increase your potassium levels, because the data, and nutritional data and many studies show that imbalance between high sodium intake and low potassium intake is no bueno for your health. But you can sort of negate some of those harmful consequences of high sodium levels, even which might have negative effects, even in addition to just the changes in blood pressure. But most of it's just potential blood pressure issues. But potassium helps to negate this stuff. And potassium is the inside of your cells, and so there's important balances there. We don't need to get into all of that, but just if you're increasing your sodium intake purposefully, for maybe because you really are losing a lot, it's good to potentially increase your potassium intake as well. All right. So your sodium intake, yes, you want to be able to increase that if you need it, and if you're losing more. It's going to be more important though, as I said, if you start to sweat a lot, you're a salty sweater, you're more than 2 liters per hour, that's when you start to have to think, okay, do I need to have more sodium intake? You can always just weigh yourself as well and make sure that your weight's not like slowly going down over time, because that's it's not about like fat mass, but that could be because you're actually being sodium depleted. And so maintaining a normal weight and hydration status by looking at your urine is another way to ensure that you are normally hydrated. Okay, and this is just important to look at the sodium again, just because it's what maintains the extracellular fluid volume, the osmolarity, blood pressure, the blood volume, fluid distribution, everything is all done by sodium. Okay, now the other part we need to cover is about hydration in general. Sometimes in the market we hear about increased hydration, hyperhydration, cellular hydration, and especially like specific water claims. This is a special water that's going to improve the hydration status of your cells. And I want to use this background information to help you understand whether or not those claims make sense, and if they did, what would be the potential consequences of those claims being real, all right? First, we need to understand what maintains hydration. And hydration is governed by two main things, right? Our osmotic gradient. So I just want to write, I'll just go like this, okay? Hydration. It's kind of overview, a little review. Hydration, by one, our osmotic gradient. All right, and that osmotic gradient is really built upon our ion distribution, okay? Ion, in this case specifically, our sodium distribution. Over here, right? Extracellular fluid, 145 millimoles, versus the inside, right? Sodium was around 10 millimoles from our cell membrane courses. Okay, so this is how we maintain our hydration. And then, of course, just functioning a healthy body, right? Now, our aquaporin function. Now, let's look at that. So we talk about these aquaporins right here. I want to really think about how our aquaporins work. So let's draw a cell membrane here, okay? Let's draw a cell membrane. These here are the fatty acids. Remember how cell membranes have the hydrophobic portion, all the fat on the outside, and the hydrophilic portion on the inside. Okay, that's what we're doing. So we know that this is kind of the outside of the membrane here is hydrophobic, so water is going to be repelling from that. And then here's what we're going to do. We're going to draw this, basically this channel here, okay? This is the protein channel. This here is going to be our aquaporin. Aquaporin. I was going to say aquaporin too. This is our aquaporin. Now, water. Here's a water molecule, and this is the shape of a water molecule. Notice that this is, I'll draw a big one here. We know this looks kind of like a Mickey Mouse molecule, right? Because you have all these negative charges on the oxygen right here. So the hydrogens over here are slightly positively charged, and oxygen over here is slightly negatively charged. And that makes this water molecule a polar molecule. Now, this water molecule actually has to go through this aquaporin, and there's charges inside of this aquaporin, right? There's like these histidine residues, arginine residues that are positively charged. So if you can imagine the water molecule, for it to go through, it literally has to change its orientation, okay? It'll have to change its orientation in order to make it through that channel, and then it comes through. So this does important things. One, this excludes many other types of molecules. They have to have the right conformation and shape to it, and also this polarity basically of this water molecule is this dipole movement is going to make that molecule alter its switching, right? And this makes for a really good filter, basically, these aquaporin channels. And it's going to just move down its concentration gradient, right? Its osmotic concentration gradient. Now, let's think about, we understand the aquaporin selectivity. We understand the osmotic gradient is maintained with these sodium channels right here, right? My question to you is, what would happen then if we were able to magically make a water that did not follow the basic principles of the osmotic gradient, right? So we don't have this osmotic gradient anymore. Well, think about our example over here, right? What would this look like? Here, water is following this osmotic gradient, and it's creating this. In this case, we created a water that is so magical that it doesn't follow osmotic gradient. It's just gonna, you put a bunch of salt on this side, and then it doesn't equilibrate, it doesn't change anything at all. If that happens, if you break the osmotic gradient, you don't care what the ion distribution is. And so you're going to have, you can have hypernatremia, or like super high ion concentration on one side, and water does not go over there to dilute it. It doesn't care to go over there. Or maybe you are dehydrated, and it's like, you're dehydrated, so normally water would want to come through here so you can reabsorb it. But because this is a special water, it's just going to, it's just going to go right through into the urine anyways, right? Or maybe you need to conserve more water, or you want to excrete more water. So it'll just come through here and dilute your sodium levels, and then you end up destroying your plasma membrane, the cell membrane potential, because you destroyed the osmotic gradient. We could go through so many examples of what would happen if you don't have that osmotic gradient, which would be totally destroyed if some of these claims about these miracle structured waters were true. But the fact is, fortunately, they're not, because your cells would literally not be able to function normally because you're not able to maintain that critical hydration status. It wouldn't follow the ions, because remember, it's the osmotic gradient that regulates hydration. It's the ion distribution that has the water go from one compartment to the other. And these aquaporin channels are specifically designed with high selectivity to exclude things like the protons and prevent change in electrochemical gradients and so on, so it can maintain that optimal hydration. Now, to really put a fine point on this, we can consider conditions where there is altered hydration status, right? So if we look at an issue with, say, diabetes, okay? So in this case, with diabetes, we have high glucose levels. So with high glucose levels, what is that going to do to the osmolarity, right? What will that do to the osmolarity? All this glucose levels is in the blood. What's going to do to the osmolarity? It's going to increase the osmolarity, right? If it increases the osmolarity, what is that going to do to the water inside of the cells, right? So glucose on the outside of the blood, water's on the inside. You want to maintain your cells between 285, 295 milliosmoles. In the cell, outside the cell, everywhere should be this osmolarity, okay? You increase osmolarity in the blood, what's going to happen to the water inside the cells? It's going to do this. You increase, basically you put a bunch of glucose here, water's going to go from inside the cell and go out. So you're going to do what to the cellular hydration? You're going to decrease the water. You're basically going to dehydrate the cell. And that's why somebody who is diabetic, they're always thirsty because they have high blood osmolarity, and so the water leaves the cell to dilute the outside extracellular fluid, and that now the cell becomes hyperosmotic itself, and that causes a very strong thirst sensation, and so now they're thirsty, they want to get water. And so again, in this case then, people who have diabetes or other situations, even taking too much sodium, for example, just by changing the osmolarity, you are changing the hydration of the cell, in this case dehydration. If you were to take seawater, for example, if you were to actually drink seawater, would that hydrate you or dehydrate you? It would dehydrate you because the seawater has so much salt in it that the water would leave your cells and go into that salt to dilute it, just like this example here. Because the salt water has such a high osmolarity, it's 700 or something milliosmoles compared to what our body needs at less than around 300 milliosmoles per liter. So you would dehydrate your cell, okay? So this here leading to, we would call this dehydration basically, cellular dehydration. And the only way to fix this is not to drink more water. No, you've got to control osmolarity. How do you control osmolarity? By controlling the glucose. Get the glucose levels down. Get these other ions regulated, all right? You can't do it by drinking special water. Again, if you were to somehow bypass basic principles of physiology and osmolarity and bypass, you would just kill the entire cell. All right, another example. We can look at cancer. This is going the opposite direction. Now, this is a little bit, every cancer is different. But the cancer has, as you know, a very dysregulated metabolism, okay? And because of that, it's going to create these osmolytes. And it creates a whole bunch of them, a whole bunch of osmolytes. These are just organic molecules from normal cellular metabolism, but its metabolism is dysregulated, so it has a whole bunch of osmolytes. These osmolytes being osmotically active, what will that do to the osmolarity? It's going to increase it. All right? It's going to increase the osmolarity, of the cell. Okay? Versus here, this is the extracellular fluid. Versus here, this is the intracellular fluid. This is the difference, okay? Because this is the cancer cell itself making all these osmolytes, and so the inside of the cell has high osmolarity. So it's going to do what with the water? The water is going to come inside of the cell, and it's going to cause the cell to swell. And the swelling of that cell, right? So you get an increase in cell swelling, right? Or cell volume. And that can lead to proliferation and growth of the cancer, actually. It's an anabolic signal. So again, this idea that, we need to do this, specialized hydration, hyperhydration, or, do all these things to cellular hydration with changing the water structure, chemically, it's impossible. And it contradicts the basic laws of how hydration is regulated, which is done by osmotic gradients and by the ion distribution. And if you were to do that, you would basically kill the cells. And there are situations where, like with diabetes, where you have a cellular dehydration. Again, you can't change the water to change that. You have to change the osmolarity. Same thing with cancer. In certain situations, you have an entire hyperosmotic cell, and you have all the water going inside, causing hyperhydration of that cell, which is problematic. So those are very important things to consider. When it comes to water, we want simply optimal hydration. That's what we want. We don't want to have excess one way or the other. And our kidneys are really good at doing it. This is what they do to maintain that optimal hydration. We just need to make sure that we are providing our bodies with what is required to maintain that optimal hydration. And what is that? Well, again, we need to make sure that our water loss. How much would that be? If you calculate all the insensible and sensible losses up, you're going to be around 2.7 to 3.7 liters per day. Okay, that's what's recommended for fluid intake. That includes not just water, but that can be coffee and tea and your foods, the water that comes from your fruits and vegetables, everything. That is the recommended, or adequate intake. It's not a lot, and as long as you are getting enough water so that you are not losing more than you're taking in, and you're getting enough sodium, then your kidneys, your magical, wonderful kidneys, this portion of the nephron, will do everything else. And you can maintain your sodium levels and your blood volume so you can be in optimal hydration. You don't need to worry about drinking a whole bunch of extra water. And if you do drink a whole bunch of excess water, what's going to happen? Think about it. You're going to dilute the osmotic gradient here. You're going to suppress our ADH levels here. And you're going to make your kidney be working a whole bunch in order to quickly dilute your blood, or get rid of that water. Otherwise, the water will dilute your sodium levels and cause hyponatremia, which is lethal. So you're kind of putting your kidneys in overdrive. Now, there could be some benefits to drinking a bit more water because you are flushing out the kidney better, and so with in some cases like kidney stones, for example. So it's okay. You can drink quite a bit of extra water. That's not the problem. But you don't want to drink such a small amount all the time, because that's also a problem. I'm just trying to say that the range of hydration is really quite high. And also, as you get older, people tend to mistake their hunger signal, or their thirst signal, for a hunger signal. And so sometimes it's better to drink water than just to go get more food. It's not going to help you maintain your weight and things as well. So our thirst sensation actually does decrease over time. And so you do want to be cognizant of that. A lot of people probably are slightly dehydrated. But our bodies can handle that. Like I said, at 1% to 2% dehydration starts to cause impaired cognitive and physical performance. And so you want to maintain your hydration, but you don't need to overthink it. You don't need special waters. You don't need to drink excess amount of water. You just need to give yourself an adequate amount of water, an adequate amount of electrolyte, specifically sodium, and you will be totally fine. So maintaining optimal hydration is done simply by that, by maintaining sufficient water intake and sufficient sodium intake, because our bodies can do the rest, because it follows simply osmotic gradient, the ion distribution, and it's controlled just by having a functioning, healthy kidney, right? As long as you're doing all of that, you're going to have optimal hydration levels, and everything's going to be A-okay. And that also, by not drinking excess amount of water or super dehydrated, it's not going to drastically change your hormones more than they should be. Specifically, the hormones we're talking about is vasopressin and aldosterone levels. And there's also the atrial natriuretic peptide hormone, which is kind of the antagonist to the vasopressin. all of these are really important, and you don't need to push things to their limits. There's no reason to do that. And it's just amazing that our nephrons, our kidneys, are able to maintain such a tight osmolarity of just this right here. It's really quite a tight range, kind of like pH is a tight range. This is a very tight range. And small changes immediately elicit a thirst sensation, elicit the release of ADH, and the kidneys control everything else. So now we need to talk about when it comes to exercise performance.